you think about shifting from caregiving to community connecting, it really requires different things of um, primarily your direct support staff. But I'm going to begin talking today about the changes that I really feel need to be made in your agencies in terms of who you are, who you think you are, what you believe and where you're going. So with that, I'm going to just jump right in here and talk about a little bit about values, vision, and mission, and what I call getting your ducks in a row. I don't think that it doesn't make sense that you ask your staff to do something that is really very different than your belief system in the words that you have on paper and your actions and your statements. And we're going to talk about those in a minute here, but just really touching upon value statements. They speak to you, to your beliefs, and it certainly is a starting place for development of your mission and your vision. And in any agency undergoing transformation in any way, it really comes down to sitting around and saying, well, what do we really truly believe in? But you need to figure that out before you can even imagine where you're going to go in the future, and furthermore, who's going to help you get there. Your vision is really what your description of your services, what your organization is going to look like in the future. What do you want it to be? Ideally, I mean, we often talk about dreaming without constraint. When you sit around and say there are no yeah buts, there are only really positive and very forward-thinking statements about where you want your agency to what you want your agency to look like in the future and where you want to be. And then of course your mission describes how you're going to get there. So if you don't have a strong mission, then there's just no way that you can figure out how that vision is going to be accomplished. And oftentimes, I talk to agencies about really kind of reflecting back on their accomplishments and setting goals and setting benchmarks. And really, if you've not established your mission, then it's really difficult to measure your agency's actions. Are we really moving toward that, or are we not? I love this Lewis Carroll quote from Alice in Wonderland when she asks the Cheshire Cat, "What road do I take?" And he says, "Well, where are you going?" And she says, "I don't know." Then it doesn't matter. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Not to say that in transformation or as you're shifting even responsibilities of staff, sometimes you go down a road that doesn't take you where you think you want to go. But certainly having some sense of where you want to go is really, really important. And then just a little bit about culture. Organizational culture really speaks to your organizational history. When I think about the organizational culture of KFI, I think about our culture as being people here would tell you that we're innovative, we're kind of cutting edge, but they would also tell you that the organizational culture of KFI is that we're poor. We're always poor. We're always just scraping by. We never have, a bucket of money to do everything that we want to do. And um, and that's true. Even when we do have money to do what we want to do, our organizational culture really is that we're poor. So your culture also talks about those commonly held beliefs, those values. It speaks to your actions and in your interactions with people. You can have wonderful words on paper, but if your actions don't follow through, then your words are hollow. It speaks to both casual and formal statements. So even your one-on-one conversations you have with folks that you might meet either in a facility or in the community, as well as those formal statements that you make when you're advertising or on your Facebook posts or anything of that nature. They really speak to your culture, your public images as well. Here we talk a lot. We talk a lot in stories. We tell stories. I think that's also part of our culture as an agency, that we're storytellers. But stories and rituals are also important and speak to your culture. So once again, your values, your vision, and your mission statement really need to be aligned, and your culture needs to exemplify them. They can't be out of sync. If they're out of sync, it's just not going to work well. You're not going to be where you want to be. So I don't know why this is. Oh, look at this. This isn't what the transition was. I thought it was going to be, but this is, I'm just going to load all of these here. This is what real life looks like, right? It's family, it's adversity, it's messy, it's unpredictable, it's full of things that you really love and you want to do, and pursuits and relationships. Oftentimes, for those of us who are on this call, it's full of work and career, learning, and of course responsibility, as indicated by the creature, the little guy that's holding the blocks that spell debt, right? But what about for people with disabilities? So what is actually different for them? Um, Often their lives are very predictable. They have very little risk. We write regulations and have guidance around keeping people healthy, and keeping people safe. And often those words really translate to the supports that people receive. And so it also translates to how staff think about their job. If they think their job is to keep people safe, and to keep people from preventing them from risk and natural consequences and the like, then their jobs are going to speak to them very, very differently than if their job is to really be much more like this right here. I often talk about keeping people in a bubble, where they're kind of wrapped with care. And we know that oftentimes people who are the most protected and segregated from society are at the biggest risk for danger and exploitation. So, how do you get from here to there? When I look at often at people's goals, they really kind of look like what's on this left-hand side of the screen. It's coloring within the lines and being polite, and there's street crossing goals, and certainly nutrition goals, and wipe your hands after you use the restroom, and being appropriate. But real life goals really speak to work, and things that make you happy to pursue. Things that when you get up in the morning, you're not thinking about, oh goodness, I'm going to cross the street today, or I'm going to be appropriate, or I'm going to be polite. Certainly, you want to do those things safely and well, but that's not what really lights up your life. A lot of the things that I think sometimes we do with and for people with disabilities get them ready for life. It's not real life. I pulled this from a really fairly dated article. It's 1999, from John O'Brien and Connie Lyle O'Brien, from the Origins of Person-Centered Planning, a Community of Practice Perspective. And they kind of lay out this story of George. Who is George? And if you see George as a person with a mental age of 4 years, 3 months, then you might likely think that George needs a program for children, that George might be engaged in coloring within the lines, and being polite and patient and learning how to cross the street. If you see him as a person with an IQ under 30, then you might often think that he needs to be protected from the world, that he's somebody who is really vulnerable, and that would necessitate him being in a place, a person who's severely disabled, a person who has an indication of brain damage or regression, a person with acute temper flare-ups directed at staff. And so what if you see a person that way, then what he needs is very, very different than what he would need if you saw him this way, from a connections perspective versus a caregiving perspective. So George, if you see him as a 40-year-old man who's missed most typical experiences in his life, and that includes not having a real job. If you look upon George as a person with no income, if you look upon George as a person who's been isolated all his life and who's had very little contact, very few connections, very few opportunity to connect with the wider world, the wider community. Somebody who has very little control over the direction of his life and the like, and somebody who's treated as a child by his mother, but certainly has had 40 years of real life experiences under his belt. And if you see him as a delightful man, a man of promise, a man who has aspirations and who has interests and who has preferences, then what he needs is a very, very different thing. So you would be looking for a real job for him. You'd be looking for some way for him to earn income. You would expose him to lots of different experiences, even as a means to just determine what lights up his eyes, what makes his life for him worth getting out of bed in the morning. You would want him to have relationships with other people and connections, friends, acquaintances. You'd want to work on trying to figure out a vision for his future. And then what does he need for supports to get there? I love this cartoon. Meaningful outcomes, do they just happen? And the guy with the box around his head, over his head, and the other guy thinking outside the box is difficult for some people, but keep trying. And sometimes it still feels like that today, KFI, certainly 30 some years down the road. Here are some questions that lead to quality outcomes that we struggle with around people and with people and their allies in their lives. We ask, how can we expand and deepen a person's relationships? We want to know, how can we enhance a person's reputation, increase the likelihood of them experiencing respect? How do we assist people to develop their capacities and contribute to community life? This is often times when we talk about employment for people. We want to wrestle with the question of how to help people have more choice and control in their lives. And then how do we increase people's presence in the life of their community? And not just as guests of the community, but as truly participants in the community. And this is what shapes a person's person-centered plan, and this is what shapes the supports that is kind of like the once we answer some of those questions and write goals around those answers, and that's the direction that we hand to our staff and say, okay, go go figure this out, go accomplish this with the person that you may be supporting. So for growing in relationships, uh, we take a look at the focused person. We say, what makes them happy? What talents and interests do they possess? And how could they, who do we know that could be invited to share those same talents? And this is a picture of Kathy with a friend of hers in the community. Kathy loves birds, and one of the things that she does in her community is she fills the bird feeders at her local hospital. It's a picture of her with the director of nursing down bottom. So we ask the question, who also loves birds? Where can she express this interest in birds in her community? For Kathy, those are just a couple of things that she does. For Laura in southern Maine, she goes to a bird sanctuary. And for Dorothy in my community, she has a subscription to her bird magazine and invites a friend, a neighbor, Dot, over to watch birds and go through the magazine with her. So, I mean, a love of birds can just take on many, many different forms of an invitation for people to spend time with others, experiencing respect and having valued roles, holding valued roles. So we really want to know if somebody has an interest or a skill, how can we turn that into a socially valued role? And in addition, how could that lead to paid employment? So Jenny is a gardener. She expressed an interest in flowers and in dirt, and so she works in her community's garden, her public garden in her community. Melissa, pictured here, is a baker. Melissa really didn't have many opportunities at home to use the kitchen, and so she volunteers at her Ronald McDonald House, and they look forward to Melissa coming. She bakes sweets for the people who are staying there. Lenny is a public speaker and a trainer. He does part of the orientation of all of our new staff. Robert is a member of the Knights of Columbus. These are all very valued roles that people hold in their communities that were developed with the assistance of staff in using their connections. And contributing, how can a person's qualities and interests and preferences be turned into paid employment, or how could they meaningfully go about their day in service to someone or something? And so Faye is a woman who is a Native American, and she reconnected with her tribe and got a paid position in their community room. Corey is a member of the Snowmobile Club. Christina volunteers for the Audubon Society. She's pictured there, and she's honing her clerical skills and actually had an interview last week for a paid clerical position, not at the Audubon Society, but in a different business. And Kathy visits shut-ins and brings them muffins. That's how she fills her time through her church, actually. And then when we struggle with making choices, um, so we look at, well, how, what does a person have for making choices right now, and what could we add? We're not talking necessarily about really earth-shattering things. A lot of people don't have a say in what they eat, or what time they eat, or what to wear, or who they spend time with, or what they do during the daytime. This is Dan pictured, who happens to own his own home, and he sets his own schedule and his routine. But that was back in 1989, actually, when he first got that opportunity to do that. And then we take a look at sharing ordinary places, and we ask, how can we increase a person's presence in community life? And oftentimes I think for a lot of us that's kind of where the discussion ends. Well, they're out there, they're there. And I love using this graphic because it really speaks to the levels of inclusion. On the bottom left, looking at exclusion, where you're outside of the fabric of the community. Oftentimes, this really is reflective of institutionalization. The next circle, segregation, is where people are set off to the side. They're not part of the community, and they are really kind of reflective of segregated services and facility services, where people really are congregated together and segregated. And then integration, I think that this is really kind of how we really get it wrong. So we like, oh, it's important for people to be in the community, but they're still going about in their own segregated group, and they're still sticking together. And you can see, unlike inclusion, the top, this is what we're aspiring for, right? That they're scattered about community members, that they're not all together in a group, that they really get an opportunity to interact with people in the community. I think that getting around is important to consider as well. So how do we even arrive at the community? Do we arrive so that the community members are likely to say or think, oh, here come those people, because they're oftentimes in a large vehicle emblazoned with the name of the agency on the side of it, as if this is who I belong to, this is where I belong, and or are they arriving in more uh, smaller, more normalizing vehicles like staff vehicles or a smaller agency accessible vehicle if need be, or taking local, state, or county transportation systems, or taxis, or Robert gets around town on a bicycle. We operate mostly in rural areas, and so the public transportation system tends to be a taxi. But in southern Maine, and in some larger communities, there is a bus system that people do take, sometimes with support and sometimes independently. And then family, friends, and coworkers. The solutions to transportation, which often stymie any discussion of community inclusion, are solved as just individually, and they're all customized solutions to an individual problem. There's no one size fits all. And then looking at community exploration, it's not a matter of just where. We need to ask the question, who will you meet there? That community really is sets of relationships. It's really people. It's not buildings. It's not in terms of community inclusion, community in this case isn't a zip code. It's not bricks and mortar. It's relationships. Where are you going to go in order to interact and be with people who are pursuing the same interests over and over and over again, so that people will have an opportunity to get known, to be known by their name and to be known by their personality, not to be known as somebody from that agency or one of those people. And so we would, certainly guard against anything that looks like an outing, or what I call disability tourism, where people, go about their own community as if they're tourists, um, that never really interact with anybody within the community. They never kind of break through to have a relationship or even a conversation with people. And then we want to talk about shifting staff. And I think that the majority of staff that we all hire could be considered good company. They're good people. They're people who um, like a challenge, but who like being in the presence of people with disabilities. And certainly we need to be on the lookout for those people, right? We don't want people who are controlling or, angry or lazy or any of some of the other things that we could say about people. And oftentimes, though, they come with a caregiving attitude. They are going to, take care of somebody who is more dependent than they are. The staff of the future we need to be opportunistic, and we need them to be connectors. And I looked up when I used that word, I thought, well, let's see if that's really the right word. Is that the word I'm searching for? And so I looked up some synonyms, and synonyms for opportunist is risk taker, adventurer, wheeler dealer. I love that one. Trailblazer, pioneer. And that's just the opposite of caregiving, isn't it? So caregiving suggests this more passive role in a person's life. And risk taker, adventurer, trailblazer, pioneer, those are very, very active statements. It conjures up a real doing active role with people. And that's who we really need to be looking for. So I gave some thought to recruiting and hiring staff. And right from the get-go, we pay attention to the words that we use in advertising. So we make sure we're not projecting an image that we're looking for somebody to take care of somebody else, that we're projecting an image of adventure seeking. We're projecting an image of the person that you want to hire as being a real active participant in somebody's life. So they know when they read that job ad, I'm going to be on the go. I'm not going to be kind of a stationary kind of person. We try to discern people's values during the hiring process, during the interview process. Yeah, I mean, we ask certain questions to try and get at them during the interview, and we don't always get it right, put it that way. But we do know that the process of change ultimately relies more on values than strategy. We really think we can teach people just about anything we want them to know, but they've got to walk through the door believing that people with disabilities have the right to lead what we would consider a typical life in the community. They have to believe that coming in. And then we can teach them about individual people and the supports that they need and what those supports would look like. We try to hire people from the same community as the people they support. Why set yourself up for failure if your main goal is to get people connected to the community? You need to hire staff who know who people are, who understand who lives in their community, and who has certain interests in who people might enjoy being with. So you really need to have knowledge of the community. If you don't, then you need to be able to share with us how are you going to understand and gain in knowledge about the community that that person lives in. The applicant needs to describe how they are connected to their community. So we don't want to hire couch potatoes. You wouldn't want to hire my husband. He's a homebody. He loves that. You'd want to hire me. I'm a joiner. I'm a doer. I'm in lots of different places all the time. So who you hire in terms of how they're connected to their community, you really need to try and figure that out during that interview process. And sometimes we actually advertise for someone who, fill in the blank, is knowledgeable about or connected to um, a certain group or club or whatever, if that's important to the person who is going to be needing the supports. And then we need to give people permission to use their personal connections on behalf of the people that they're supporting. And not just early on, as short time ago as just a few months ago, I did a presentation for my board of directors and talked about some people's lives and their connections. And so we tell stories and we show pictures, and we really highlight people's changed lives. This is how we've made a difference in that person's life. And of course, if at all possible and when at all possible, you want to hire people with disabilities themselves and their family members in the hiring process. They often have uh, great concerns and good questions. And even if you want to vet several candidates first and then say, okay, either of these people we think are great, you choose. So that they have the final say. I looked at one of our direct support position job descriptions and picked out some things that we have in our job descriptions that really speak to that connecting role for people. So the very first thing we talk about is you have to hold high expectations for each person's quality of life as a full citizen and community member. So we're saying right from the start, you've got to have high expectations for that outcome in the broadest sense. One of their duties, this is right from their job description, is to introduce people to community resources and community members. So, right now, right off, they see in their job description, you have a connecting role, you have a connecting responsibility. They facilitate community inclusion by assisting people to use generic resources. So that's things that other people in our community use, with the YMCA if they want to go work out, or regular hairdresser if they're going to get their hair done. We want them to join groups or in clubs and classes around issues that interest them. We want them to volunteer, give back to the community as a way of getting to know people and to hone their interests and skills, connect with friends, develop sustained relationships through consistent shared activity with community members, because that's how it works for all of us. We want our staff to act as a role model with regard to age appropriate and socially typical behavior. That's a lot of subjective language there, but I can tell you that we support a man in southern Maine, in the Maine's largest city of Portland, Maine, and he's into the art scene, and his staff look very, very different than somebody who is an artist in my little town of Millinocket. The staff just present themselves in appearance differently, and the staff person who's helping Adam in Southern Maine would just never be as well accepted, let me just say, in this little more conservative town that I live in. So they've got to blend in. In other words, they've got to blend into the background. And then, of course, they need to advocate for the choices, rights, and dreams of each individual. So they have to know them well and understand the differences and advocate for their rights and choices, even if sometimes that wouldn't be a lifestyle that we might choose for ourselves. So staff have to understand how to separate their own, what they would want for their own life with what the person wants. And a few things about our direct support staff. Again, we have no buildings, and so they really are your bricks and mortar. They speak to your mission. They are representatives and ambassadors of the people they support, as well as your agency. Again, they must be connected to the community and have high expectations of themselves and of the people they support. And it's a really tough thing, but they need to feel connected to the mission of the agency, even though they're not necessarily in direct connection with other people who are doing the same thing in the agency or maybe even in the same community. They need to be amenable to teachable moments. And so Lori is a supervisor in Southern Maine, and she may spend some time with a staff person in while she's supporting one or two people. And Lori is going to try and figure out, well, show me how you, or, have you ever considered? So, people can take advice and feedback right on the fly, right while they're providing those supports. I can't emphasize this enough that they need to be negotiators and askers. So many, I think so many community members are there and would be willing to engage in a relationship with somebody based upon an interest that they themselves have, if only they would be asked. And so we think it's important that people learn to ask, that they be askers. And negotiators, because sometimes we're put in positions of maybe helping a person negotiate with a landlord or an employer or even a community member. You're really dealing with the public. You're in the public eye, and so anything can and does happen. So it really requires different skills and abilities and great flexibility. There's In our agency, there's no such thing of, well, it's Wednesday, so it's laundry day. Even if the person has, that they're going to, keep their laundry, or there may be a goal around doing laundry that's a getting ready for life goal. Nobody gets up in the morning and goes, yay, I'm going to do laundry today. Um, but there's really no set time or set day. And so we let the natural course of action work. And gosh, you're out of clean shirts. Maybe we should spend some time getting caught up on that. And they need to, and that's part of that negotiation as well, a big part of it. And then they need to make independent decisions and judgments throughout the day, that nobody is standing over them saying, this is the good thing to do, the bad thing to do, the right thing to do, or this is going to obstruct the mission, or it's going to help you move down the road. And a few words about the supervisory and management job descriptions at our agency. So, we have in there that people who supervise and manage people need to energize people to work toward a shared vision. They need to develop people in teams capable of exceptional performance. Those that we hold our staff, our supervisory and management staff to. Develop new services and such in keeping with KFI's values and mission. There it is, boom, right in that job description. They have to understand what those are and constantly not only themselves be working toward that, but be guiding other people under their line of direct authority to that too. We want them to be cutting edge, and we speak to that in their job description by saying that they should research and introduce latest approaches, trends, and cutting edge supports, embrace change with innovation, courage, and resiliency. So we're telling people, be bold, be a pioneer, be a risk taker, be adventurer, be adventuresome, right in their job description. And in terms of holding people accountable, I think it's important when you're shifting from a caregiving to a community connector role that people be actually evaluated to that same standard. So sometimes we actually use job descriptions, the actual responsibilities in the job description, but we try and hit all of these bullets that they need to demonstrate uh, the values of our organization and knowledge of the people that they support. They need to, we're concerned about their community image, their initiative and flexibility, and on the list goes. I often tell people when they're first hired in terms of cooperation and teamwork that, most times when people either we say goodbye to somebody who is employed by our agency. So it's our idea to say goodbye, or it's their idea to say goodbye to us. 99% of the time, it's because they cannot get along with a coworker. And so we actually speak to cooperation and teamwork on their employee evaluation, as well as the relationship with the people they support. That's often never in question. It has to do with how they get along or don't get along with their coworkers. Ethics, integrity, judgment, and the like. And we also hold them accountable for outcomes. So they have to report on those outcomes. The one agency sets them, and they have to say, well, this is what I've done, and this is what has happened in this quarter around this particular outcome, whether it's a person I support has a new relationship with somebody or has a job or whatnot. Um, don't know what happened there. There.
Gail, is it back? Sorry, I had a problem on my end and I
Oh,
pushed something, so I apologize.
I didn't think it was anything I touched. Okay, thank you, Trish.
Is it back and
It's fine.
okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay,
Thanks. It's great.
I
No
apologize.
problem. No. So Peter Drucker is somebody I love to quote. He's passed away, but he was a management writer and guru, and he wrote a lot of books and has some amazing quotes. Look up some Peter Drucker quotes, and you'll find some great ones. That he said, the purpose of an organization is to allow ordinary men and women to do an extraordinary job. And this is what we're talking about. When people, sometimes people say, where do you find your staff? Where do you find your staff? And I can tell you they're ordinary men and women, but it's all those things around this organization. It's the alignment of the values and the vision and the mission and our organizational culture and the way that we talk about what people's jobs are and then hold them accountable for those outcomes. That's what makes them extraordinary. They really, really are. And then I have 5 final tips for success. I was just things I was like, oh, I should have mentioned this, and oh, I should have mentioned that, and I was kind of winding down the um, the PowerPoint because I wanted to make sure that there was some time left for questions and answers. And I just think that it's just so important, both when you're trying to attract good people to do this work, when you're trying to find, because you're finding people from the very community that you're impacting, right? I mean, these people, our good staff are not like kind of sitting off on the side waiting to be called up from the miners, right? They're part of our communities. They see us every day and they make decisions. Boy, would I really like to do that for work, or wouldn't I like to do that for work? And so I think we need to be really aware of the messages that we send everybody, the community. And we need to be aware by paying attention to our appearance, our actions. How do we arrive in community? What are we using for transportation? Our voice inflection, especially when we're in relationship with people we support, and the words we use. They're so, so, so powerful. And we send messages by all of those things. What are we communicating? Are we communicating dependence? Are we communicating that the person we're with is actually in the role of child, that they're dangerous, pitiable, diseased? Are they in the role of client? These are all devalued roles. We talked before about valued roles of, gardener and member and public speaker. These are devalued roles that people feel, especially people with disabilities, that people feel every single day. And so we need to work against that. And we can do that with intention and by working in a real state of consciousness around what we're doing, especially when we're in the presence of community members. Once again, become an asker. It never hurts to ask. All the person can say is no, or I'll think about it. But I'll tell you, you'll just be amazed how many times people say, yes, yes, I would love to do that. Abandon the notion of readiness, the continuum of services, and the notion that people need fixing. So the readiness model and the continuum of services says you're not ready for community yet, you're not ready for relationship yet. You've got to earn your right before you go to the next level. And we think that everybody is as ready as they need to be right now. And oftentimes it's the environment that plays a huge role in a person's behavior, and in how the person relates to other people. And so when you know, stop trying to fix people and just go from point A to point Z in one step, it works out. It works out much better. Pay better, pay better, literally pay better for the outcomes you seek, and reward the positive outcomes you get. We had for a while in this agency, as we were transforming, literally two sets of pay for kind of the same job title, although we started changing job titles to reflect more of that connector role when we were still had a facility program and we were transitioning to community, and we paid better for the community connector role. We pay better today for people who are involved in employment supports, either seeking jobs for people, supporting them on the job, or doing career planning. We pay better. We pay those people better. And we reward positive outcomes. There are rewards for financial rewards for people who get somebody a customized job, for example. There's a reward for giving somebody, a job developer, a lead to somebody who ends up getting a customized job. So, we reward the pipeline too, not just the person who seals the deal. And then finally, my advice to you is to work in a state of positive discontent, what we call positive discontent. So you know that there's always room for improvement. There are always better ways. We don't advise you to be discontented, because that's going to just make you, not fun to work with. But a positive discontent means you're always searching, you're always looking. There's, bad, good, better, best. You're always striving for best. You know that best is a moving target, and you want to just keep moving your sights along that line as well. And then finally, the measure of success is not the accomplishments of goals and programs, but living a good life. So when you take a giant step back and say, is that the life? Does that person have a life I would enjoy living? Is that what somebody might say is an enviable life? If that person were to leave the community, who would care? Who would miss that person until we can really answer those questions on behalf of everybody we support. We know we still have a lot of work to do ahead. And that's it. So, time for um, time for some, my timer's going off, which is just perfect. So I'd love to have some questions or any comments.
Sorry, this is Trisha. I think we have somebody typing in the chat box now, but I just wanted to ask you, just because it does come up a lot, right, as people are thinking about serving folks that have some pretty significant behavioral challenges, or people who have pretty significant healthcare needs, or are not able to necessarily have a typical or kind of a verbal conversation with other people. I know that you support people to have those valued social roles that kind of fit into those boxes, if you will. And so if you could just kind of speak to that, I just know that's always a question that comes up.
Right, yeah, right. But this person acts out, or this person doesn't have use words, and how am I going to introduce this person? And again, most of it is just you need to know who you're dealing with. So Trisha has met a woman named Courtney, who we provide supports to, very intensive supports to. Courtney has 24/7 supports around the clock. However, Courtney is a homeowner. She is a business owner. She has a volunteer job. She has typical friends in the community. She's a church member. She's a kayaker. So she has all of those things in her life going for her. And she has three specialists. They're Courtney specialists who work to support her. So they are definitely sometimes in the role of caregiver. They really, really, really are. I mean, Courtney is not toilet trained, and Courtney has needs a great deal of assistance in terms of her personal care. She needs assistance with meal preparation, even though she can pick out what she wants to eat. But none of that, we don't think of any of that as well until Courtney can learn to do those things. Then Courtney really can't go to work. So Courtney owns a vending machine business, and her three staff support her in that business. So they have all of the certifications of employment specialist, job coach, and one is a career planner. So they're Courtney specialists. Now, Courtney doesn't have to get up every morning and leave her house at 9 o'clock in the morning and have this artificial community life and come home at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Everybody uses their home as a base of operation, just like we would, just like we do. So if it's a Saturday for us and we're going to leave and we're going to go grocery shopping and then we're going to come home and then we're going to go work out at the gym and then we come home and then we might invite somebody in and then that's going to end and we're going to go do something else. And so that's how everybody's life is structured. And so for Melinda, who has a lot of physical and medical challenges about her. Her life isn't as robust as in terms of her community presence as Robert's, who you know, has a job, 15-hour a week wage employment job, about 7 or 8 hours a week of self-employment, and 24, 25 hours a week of volunteer stuff that he does every single week. So Melinda's life looks very, very different than Robert's. So we prefer not to um, uh, feed her in public. She has a G tube, and so we think that that's a private thing that should be done at home. But Melinda goes to a church. She belongs to a ladies' organization. She goes grocery shopping. She gets her fingernails done. So her life looks very, very different than somebody who has a really, really active life. But nonetheless, the goals and aspirations for Melinda's community presence are always the same as they are for Robert's. Lanny has some incredibly off-putting, let's just say, behaviors around him. And so it's a real high risk when he goes into a public place that he may destroy a display of groceries. He may put his head through a window. He may punch out a wall. However, our goals and aspirations for Lanny, for his community presence, are the same as they are for everybody else. And so Lanny does some really, he loves hiking, he loves swimming, so he does a lot of that in the community. He loves going to a particular store, well, it's Walmart, to buy shampoo and soap. He's just recently connected with a Russian Orthodox church, and it's a real small church. They do a lot of chanting, and he loves that. Laney doesn't use a lot of words to communicate, but he chants in rhythm with the chanters. They use a lot of incense, and he loves that. And so, we didn't write a goal about increasing olfactory, sensory, integration for Lanny. We just, helping him to belong to something. And as a result of that, all of those good things are happening in his life by him connected to that church. Despite the fact that, and he's never had any off-putting behaviors in the church or with church members, and so that part of his life is going great. All right, there's a question about Jeff. Where does all the funding come from? Whoops. For your program? And the answer, Jeff, is Medicaid. We're heavily, heavily Medicaid funded. We don't have Maine does not have like a county system where we get county funds. So it's all filtered through the state. Every single individual we support has an allocation of Medicaid funding that is unique to them, and that's what we use. We don't do any we don't do any fundraising. We think that sends a community the wrong message about who we are and who we support, and so we don't do fundraising. So we make it work on what we get for Medicaid funding.
This is Trisha. I don't see any other questions. Hopefully, we had quite a few more people register than got on and attended. So I'm glad that we were able to record it. But Gail, I think this has been amazing, and I think about providers who are starting to think about doing things differently, or families if they're hiring their own staff to do self-administered services, to start thinking about who you're looking for differently. And this could be a really great tool in a staff meeting or training, and having people view the webinar and then talk about what that would look like in leadership or whatever. So thank you so much for providing this tool for us in Utah, and really appreciate your time. If there's any other questions, go ahead and zap them now. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and say thanks to Gail and log off. I don't see any more. So
Okay, thank
thank
you
you
for
so
your time.
much.
My
Thanks
pleasure.
everybody.
Bye bye.